Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Brad Gottschall. I am the Lower Paxton Township Manager, and in typical fashion, I will give a brief summary of tonight's meeting before we begin, particularly for the benefit of those who may be watching at home. So tonight's board meeting, the board will hear from Public Safety Director Adam Koshiba on the Township's Emergency Operations Plan to be executed next week through Resolution 21-06. After this, Township residents Mr. Powell and Ms. Pollard in the audience here will present a number of proposed amendments to the zoning code pertaining to the keeping of bees and hens. And at this point, all the members of the board are seated and prepared to conduct business. But before I let that occur, I just would like to remind again those who are interested in speaking on behalf of an issue or an issue that's not on the agenda, that we ask that you sign your name on the sheet nearest the entry door for the benefit of the recording secretary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll call this meeting of the Lower Paxton Township Board of Supervisors to order. I would like to ask everyone to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led by Supervisor Zumas. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will now move to public comment. Public comment is for items that are not on the agenda this evening. If you are here to speak to an item that is on the agenda, we will take public comment at that point. So would anybody like to address the board on an item not on the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none. Before we go to the presentation of the resolution, I see Director Koshiba is here. I first of all would like to announce that the Board of Supervisors did meet in executive session prior to this meeting and will do so following it. Supervisor Judd is not with us this evening. He had come into contact with an individual who has tested positive for COVID. So Mr. Judd is quarantining while waiting test results. And I'm sure he's watching us via television, but he's only here tonight because out of an abundance of caution, he and his family are quarantining till COVID tests can be conducted. So with that, we will move to presentation of Resolution 2106, this being the Township's 2-year emergency operations plan, and we have Director Koshiba with us. Good evening, Director.
Good evening, Chairman of the Board, members of the Board. So before you is and I think should be up on the screen here, is a copy of the Dauphin County Emergency Management or Emergency Operations Plan. I just wanted to speak briefly about why we're adopting the Dauphin County plan and why we're not instituting our own plan. The Dauphin County plan provides the framework necessary to handle just about any emergency out there. It follows the National Incident Management System, known as NIMS, and also as the Incident Command System, ICS. Part 1 of the plan is a framework designed to cover natural disasters, terrorism, those sorts of things. And when you go down through the Dauphin County plan, there are many things that the county is doing or required to do as this plan is instituted. But as you move down through there, it gives direction for control and coordination, further direction and support for any of these types of emergencies. And then on page 6 of the plan, in section E, it actually, PEMA encourages local municipalities to adopt their county's plan, which is our Dauphin County plan.
Page 6?
Page 6, section E of the actual plan itself.
Let's see. Let's see if we can. Okay, well, I think we're down to this.
Well beyond that, yep.
We're still in the Roman numerals here. Page 22 overall? Okay.
Should be the next plan here, subsection E.
Subsection E?
Section E. So if you see there in subsection E, it does encourage PEMA encourages the local municipalities to adopt a plan, and it speaks of the Emergency Management Services Code there in the title, basically indicating that we can either, obviously adopt a plan, which they're recommending, and or have our own supporting plans as well. In the police department operations plan, we also have a category for emergency and special operations that would govern our framework for this. And the long and short of it is, this is great framework for us to follow, but as one of your emergency services directors, along with the fire department and the police department, we refer to every single time the National Incident Management System, and I'm very familiar with that, as is Ralph Palm in our Emergency Operations Center. And we can basically take any large-scale incident, and we can break it down and manage that incident with that type of a framework, and also with the references here in the Dauphin County plan. So we don't really see the need to adopt our own plan. The framework provided within the Dauphin County is sufficient in that plan. And, as some of you may have seen, Mr. Lohman, when we started addressing the issues with COVID, we referred back to the National Incident Management Plan. And we kind of, like I like to say, for the normal persons out there that don't understand it, we like to chunk it up a little bit and give people certain assignments and manage it. Those big scale incidents, we can manage it on a lower level and break it down with that National Incident Management Plan. So I think we'll be well set if the board agrees to adopt this plan by resolution.
Adam, are the other departments doing the same thing?
As far as I know, the neighboring departments do go by the Dauphin County plan. Now, some of them have, I know Swatera has within their police department a more refined emergency operations plan for the PD themselves. But overall, I believe this is the best way to go about it, as PEMA recommends.
Okay, good.
Any other board member questions? Do we have any comments from the public on the proposed plan? Okay, seeing none, board members, would somebody like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve Resolution 20-06 and the Township's 2-year emergency operations plan as presented by Mr. Koshiba.
2106.
Oh, I'm sorry, 2106, as presented by Mr. Koshiba.
So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, aye? Aye. Go, Director.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate the
seeing ya.
information and the presentation. Okay, now we want to move to item 6 on the agenda, which is a presentation of proposed amendments to Section 203-403 of the LPT zoning code, allowing for the keeping of bees and hens. We don't have specific proposed amendments, do we? No.
Mr. Chairman, what is included in the board's packet is a slideshow
Yes.
that I believe the presenters will be asking you to
Okay.
slide through. But there are within that slideshow some amendment proposals. So
Okay, so they're incorporated in the slide
I believe so.
presentation. We don't have a specific ordinance
a
prepared
document,
to
correct? No,
document.
correct. That is correct.
Okay. Yeah, and the purpose of the meeting tonight is to take public input on proposed potential changes to said ordinances. So we're here to listen. At this point, anybody who would like to address the board on this subject, please come to the podium, give us your name and address, and then we'll be happy to hear whatever it is you have to say.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I believe Mr. Powell and Ms.
Yes.
Ms. Poller are here.
Yes, they are.
Can,
Yes.
if you would be able to, I think you'll have to scroll through the actual
yes.
because it is a prepared as a
Yeah, when you want me to change the slide, just give me a signal and we'll change the slide.
Okay, will do. Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'm Ashley Pollard. I live at 4925 Colorado Avenue.
And I'm Colin Powell, I live there too.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. So for anyone who's not aware or hasn't been to the previous meetings, Colin and I started presenting and writing letters on this issue on January 26, 2020, on reducing restrictive ordinances to make the keeping of backyard hens and bees more accessible to residents in Lower Paxton Township who have smaller yards, such as ourselves, and I think some of you in the audience as well. So thank you for giving this the time and the energy and seriously considering this to the level that we and other residents feel is necessary. So just an overview for those of you who may not be aware, our existing ordinances in Lower Paxton Township do currently allow both backyard bees and hens. We are not asking for the board to allow new animals. These are currently allowed in our township. What we would like to see is those ordinances change to better reflect the size of those yards in our township. Through conversations with neighbors and a petition shared with Lower Paxton Township residents, both online through change.org and through door-to-door visits to neighbors, we have found overwhelming support for making these ordinances less restrictive. We are aware that there are some concerns, and we address those later in the slide. Let's see. Oh, and the request, of course, is to update the ordinances 403D2 and 403D12. And it's also really important to note that the language that we recommend is not based on what we feel or is based on what we would like for our yard. We spoke to representatives from the Extension Office, from the PA Department of Agriculture, from the Pennsylvania State Beekeepers Association.
And the Pennsylvania State Apiarist.
Oh yeah, and the state apiarist to come up with these regulations based on model ordinances and what they have seen instituted in other municipalities. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
Thank you. So we did a very informal study of the other municipalities in Dauphin County, just based on looking at their websites or calling them. Out of those, we found for hens specifically, well, first of all, backyard bees and hens are very common across Pennsylvania, in Dauphin County, and across the United States. In Dauphin County specifically, we found that 79, this is actually an error, 79% based on calculations we redid. 79% of municipalities in Dauphin County had less restrictive regulations than what we have in Lower Paxton Township. A full list of those municipalities included in that informal study, in addition to what the language is, and links to those ordinances are included in the deck. There were a handful of municipalities that didn't have their ordinances available online. In speaking, we actually followed up with the township supervisors, managers, and zoning ordinances of a few of those townships who do have less restrictive regulations, and wanted to call out that they said they get very few nuisance complaints, between 4 and 15 a year. Based on concerns with chickens running loose. There are very few concerns about noise or odor. They just don't see those calls come in.
Example is like Mechanicsburg, not in Dauphin County, but we do feel like their communities are kind of similar to ours. They said they get the same 2 people who call like all the time.
They just seem to call about everything, so one of those situations.
Yes.
Yeah. We all have those, right?
Yes.
And again, it was really interesting in looking at all of the regulations. So we have an acreage limitation here in Lower Township. You would need a minimum of an acre to have a backyard hen, or a goose, rooster, anything. It was interesting. The other neighboring municipalities that we looked at did not have acreage limitations. They did have setback requirements, regulations that they can't be a nuisance, and then, of course, that they can't run free. As far as bees, it was really interesting. So only 3 municipalities in Dauphin County, Lower Paxton being one of them, have regulations related to beekeeping. The rest of them don't have any regulations. We do feel there's some reasons for that, which we'll get into later in the deck.
Those other 2 are Pillow Borough and Halifax Borough, not Township Borough.
So yeah, Halifax doesn't permit bees at all, and Pillowboro, which I'm actually not sure where that is, somewhere in Dauphin County, requires a 25-foot distance from the property line. In conversations with the state apiarist, we did confirm that there are currently 869 hives within Dauphin County. So these bees are in our community. People have them. They are a part of people's lives within Dauphin County, and they're probably visiting your yards already. Yeah, okay.
Pillowboro, by the way, is in extreme northern Dauphin County.
Oh, good to know.
North of Millersburg, north of Gratz. Yeah, it's tucked way up there in the top.
Good to know. Thank you.
Geography lesson too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Another thing worth noting, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh can have bees and hens, and same with all of Manhattan in New York.
Yeah, all of New York City have less restrictive ordinances than we do here in Lower Paxton Township regarding hens and backyard beekeeping. Next slide, please. So for honeybees specifically, we, of course, what the residents feel is the key part to all of this. So based on the conversations generated via social media in neighborhood social media groups, the sentiment around the issue of honeybees was 100% positive. There was not one negative comment or concern about making the ordinances related to backyard beekeeping less restrictive. And again, there's almost 870 hives already in Dauphin County. Next slide, please. So as far as what we heard from experts, again, speaking to the state apiarist, the Department of Agriculture, and the Pennsylvania State Beekeepers Association, it's important to note that a lot of people don't understand the difference between a honeybee and any other native bee. There is a big difference. Honeybees are only defensive, they're not aggressive, so they may sting you if you are directly in front of their hive or if you're actively dismantling the hive. But otherwise, unless you're a flower, they are not interested in you whatsoever.
Additionally, that one sting will kill them, so it's not in their nature to be aggressive at all. They're also vegetarians, so they're not going after anything else besides pollen. Essentially, they're just not aggressive creatures. A lot of people, I feel like, have been stung as children by bees, or you've all had that moment where one comes after you when you're eating an ice cream or something. Talking to the state Beekeeping Association, that was most likely a yellow jacket, maybe a digger bee, maybe even a wasp, but not a honeybee.
Of course, if there are concerns around people being stung, it's important to note that according to the Journal of Asthma and Allergy, very few people will ever have a serious reaction to a bee sting. And the people who take on the greatest risk are, of course, the beekeepers, not the neighbors, not the family members. The beekeepers are the most likely to be stung. Just fun fact, honeybees fly a distance of 3 miles from the hive, so even if there is a fence around the yard, that's not keeping them in. They're still flying 3 miles in search of that pollen. I think the most interesting fact we learned throughout this process is that the keeping of honeybees is already regulated by the state of Pennsylvania, by the Department of Agriculture, and has been since 1921. So every bee in the state has to be registered with the PA Department of Agriculture. There are local inspectors assigned to our areas in order to make sure the bees are being maintained in a certain way, make sure there's limited or no disease in the beehives. So they're already being regulated. So I think it's important to note, you know, in this day and age, we're all stretched for time with small teams. Workloads and resourcing and time management are always a concern. So one could argue that by having an additional layer of regulation at the municipal level, you're actually causing more work than if the PA Department of Agriculture just regulated them themselves. Let's see.
That's how we know there's 869 hives in Dauphin County, because they're all registered through Dauphin.
Not to interrupt you, but let me ask you, how often are they doing inspections?
Yeah,
Or is it
so-
just if I complain, then they do an inspection?
Great question. No, so they do do a proactive inspection, I think at least once a season, and that's between April and late October.
Okay.
There are 7 inspectors assigned to the state of Pennsylvania. So yes, there are limited inspectors available, but they are available for those concerns. And I believe some folks in the audience have had contact with local inspectors as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay,
Are the
great.
beekeepers certified, licensed, and they get training?
Great question. So there is no apiary certification that I'm aware of. However, there are a lot of free or low-cost trainings through local beekeepers associations or through the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. So they are available. And it's interesting, in model ordinances provided by the Pennsylvania State Beekeepers Association, I think those trainings are mentioned as resources available to make sure people are prepared when they get a hive.
I just had a question. You had said that the honeybees, so they don't sting people at all?
Well, they do sting. They are just very unlikely to sting unless you are actively like in the hive. Or unless you're standing directly in front of it. So if you think of like a horse kicking, if you're around a horse, there's a rule that you don't walk close to its behind because it could kick you. It's the same like distance level. If you're directly in front of the hive, like if Colin's the hive and I'm standing right here, it could sting me. That's when they're most likely to sting. Or if I'm hands in the hive, pulling apart the honeycombs, but otherwise they're very unlikely to sting.
So if a neighbor had a child and the child got curious and came over into your yard and stood in front of that, you're telling me that the child would probably get stung?
I wouldn't say probably, but I would say that's when there is a chance of it happening. Just like if the child was in its own vegetable garden and interrupted a native bee or a hornet or a wasp. These bees, of course, are already in our yards. It's no different than that, in my opinion, of just knowledge of stinging insects and what to do around them.
And how many bees are normally in a hive?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it really depends, but maybe someone else I think I saw a hand.
In the spring of the year, there's approximately 10 to 15,000 bees in a hive this time of year. At the height of the season, which is usually around July, you can have around 50,000 bees in one bee hive. And she is absolutely right. That child is no more in danger than getting stung by a bee any more than that child's in danger by you backing out and that child not being where it's supposed to be and you running over that child. That sounds extremely bizarre, but the negligence at that point should not be placed on the beekeeper. The negligence is placed on the responsible adult who should be watching that child. Therefore, you shouldn't punish the beekeeper because he has bees no more than I would punish you because you have a car in your driveway.
So how many hives are you looking at having on a property?
Oh, great question. I personally am only looking at having one, but I think there are regulations in those model ordinances that are linked in your documents that say how many hives would make sense for a quarter of an acre, and maybe do you have any insight there?
He's got to come up
here,
to that.
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you could come up to answer, maybe y'all might want to step back when he comes to the podium so we have social distancing. But if he's not at the microphone, people who are watching on television or who might watch the YouTube video can't hear you.
Sure.
And if you could give us your name and address, please,
Sure.
sir.
My name is Robert House. My address is 243 Allen Road, Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And I've kept bees for 11 years. I manage in the middle of the year over 200 beehives as a hobbyist, or what they call a sideline beekeeper. I normally winter over around 100 hives here in Pennsylvania, all in the south central area. I have bee yards in Edders, York, Carlisle Borough, Boiling Springs area, all over. Most of my yards contain at least 20 20 hives, individual hives. But because I look at from my perspective is different than theirs. I look at it from a business model, whereas if I'm going to put time and energy and fuel into visiting my hives and maintaining my hives, it has to be substantial enough hives. I can tell you a lot of those hives are on properties that are just basically probably 5 acres or less, contain at least 20 beehives. In some cases, I've had up to 50 hives in some of my yards, and I've had no problem whatsoever. I have an agreement with the Borough of Carlisle, which they do not have any ordinance on honeybees, but if you question them, what they would say is we link honeybees to the same ordinance we do nuisance animals, such as pit bulls and things of that nature. But if you ask them if they've ever had any problem, they would have to reply they don't. So 2 or 3 years ago, they've offered allowance for Dickinson College to put beehives in the borough. And so I also help manage those hives at Dickinson College. I'm also the vice president of the Capital Area Beekeepers that meet at the Farm Show building. We have about 185 active members, and we meet monthly throughout the year, and we do a lot of training, short courses to train new beekeepers. And so what they said is absolutely correct. I'm a life member with the State Beekeepers Association. I'm also a life member at the Franklin County, Pennsylvania Beekeepers Association. And I regularly attend the Lancaster and the York County Beekeepers Association. And besides that, I also sell bees. So my business, besides me keeping bees, and I also bring bees into the state and sell those. Already to date this year, I've sold over 707 right here in central PA, and that number probably will continue to climb as we get into the spring. So this is a very avid hobby. It's very well needed, and as they said years ago, New York City banned the keeping of bees in their city simply because they felt, well, there's no room to put them. But when President Obama took over the administration, he lifted that ordinance, and now New York City has one of the largest thriving beekeeping industries around for backyard beekeepers, and they literally keep them on top of the rooftops in New York City. And those bees literally forage just on windowsill plants throughout the city, and they do extremely well. And so the bees, as they said, they forage for miles. So if and a lot of people have a misunderstanding. They are considered husbandry, and they are considered a livestock. But we don't necessarily train or keep that livestock. We maintain them. We cannot fence them in like you would a cow. So they're going to fly. And a lot of times, and I've had a complaint at my own yard from a neighbor who said, look, I have some bees that are getting around my pool. My kids are a little scared. My first response is, how do you know they're my bees? How do you know they're not from a tree in your backyard? And so it's a little difficult to put blame on an insect that literally flies with mouths to designate whose bee that really is. And so when I begin to explain to them the concept of the bee, the need of the bee, what they personally can do to keep the bees from coming into the yard, and then I take responsibility also as a beekeeper to provide the sources that the bees are there, which is water. So I put out bird baths and things of that nature to provide water for the bee, because the bee is going to go to the bee is one of the most resourceful insects on the face of the earth. It would rather go 5 feet for water than 500 feet for water. So it'll go to the closest source of food and also the closest source of water. And so, if we restrict the bees to a specific, you need to have so many square feet, really you're not penalizing anyone but the beekeepers. And you're hurting yourself, because 30% of, our produce and the things you find in the store are absolutely because of the honeybee, the number one pollinator in the world. And so, should there be ordinances? Yeah, I think there should be ordinances to restrict to the fact that you don't end up with one guy. I have 1/3 acre in Carlisle. The agreement that I've came with the borough is on my 1/3. I have 2 properties side by side, is 4 hives. I can maintain 4 full-size beehives on each of my 1/3 acres that I have there. And so, it sounds like a lot of bees when you consider 50,000 for each one. You're talking, 200,000 bees, right, in the middle of the summer. But if you talk to my neighbors, most of my neighbors will tell you, I don't ever see your bees. I don't see them on my flower beds. I don't see them around my house. I don't see them ever. And again, it's because the honeybee is resourceful. The honeybee only wants to go to plants that are producing nectar. So if you have plants in your yard that don't produce any food, they're not going to go there any more than a cow is going to go to a parking lot to graze. There's nothing for them. Is it possible that a child in his own backyard could step on a honeybee? Yes, if that yard is full of sweet clover or dandelions or things like that. But the same likelihood is the same as they would step on a yellow jacket, a hornet, or something else that is a wild bee, and there's no control, no ordinances on that as well. And again, it'd be impossible to police that. If you put a ban on every beehive, then you better crack out your wallet the next time you go to the grocery store, because you're going to find a significant difference in what we're going to pay for your produce and the things that we love to enjoy. So should there be ordinances? Absolutely. Is there training? Absolutely. Most of the training that we provide is 100% free, or we wouldn't have 180 members. And so I don't know what for recommendations they're asking regarding that. But like I say, in most cases, and if I can just slow it down I understand that you guys are put in a very awkward position. You're placed in a position to make rules and regulations on something you know very little about, because you're not beekeepers. And that's fine. You're going to probably make rules and regulations about maybe a street and a speed limit sign that I have very little knowledge on as well. So you have a very large task, because you're policing a lot of different areas. But just need to understand that, like they said, these bees are not aggressive bees like yellow. I do bee removals all the time. And typically I can do a bee removal with no suit on whatsoever. Once I get started, the bees actually kind of run for cover. And so they don't want to sting you. When they sting you, they die. And I think they kind of know that. And so the bees are not aggressive. They mentioned about standing in front of the beehive. And again, if you get stung by a bee in front of the beehive, that I would liken into a person standing on the runway at O'Hare Airport or at the Harrisburg International Airport. Is the possibility you're going to get hit by a plane? Absolutely. Because that is where the bees enter and exit the hive. If you stand there where 50,000 bees are coming and leaving, the likelihood of having a bee run into you is going to be extremely likely, and they're dazed and confused because you were not there 10 minutes ago or yesterday. And so when they hit you, they go into offensive mode, especially if you get stuck in your hair or something, and they're going to sting you. And again, that's a self-preservation mode to protect the beehive.
Okay.
And we don't blame them for that. That's how God created them. So there are some rules and regulations, and we teach those types of things to local beekeepers for their own personal benefit when they approach the beehive and how to work it from the side and things like that. We even teach them how to maybe set the beehive in such a way to orient the bees. Most of us have heard the term beeline. He made a beeline for it. That phrase is literally coined because bees, once they leave the hive, they immediately fly to a certain elevation upon which they can cruise. It may be 100 feet in the air. Once they hit that elevation, they literally will fly to wherever that food source is that has been communicated to them by the other bees, whether it be 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 mile away. They will not change the elevation until they literally come to that food source. They will dive bomb upon that food source. They will eat and fill their gut full of nectar or their pollen sacs full of pollen. They will leave, continue to fly to that same elevation until they get back to the hive, and then they dive bomb into the hive. That's why in many cases my neighbors never see the bees, because they literally come out and they cross every tree and every rooftop in my area, and they don't see them in their yard.
So
Okay.
I would like them to get back to that, but I do want to say, is that why there's, in the section that you're going to talk about later, there's a flyaway barrier that can be used? Does that encourages the bee to get to that elevation
Absolutely.
sooner
So
than
if you were to-
crossing yards?
If you were to put a chain link fence, you would be doing nothing because the bees can go through the chain link fence. But if you were to, say, put a beehive literally in front of your wall, 5 feet in front of your wall, those bees would literally come out and they would fly up over that wall before they would go anywhere. They would continue to climb. So if you want to put a hive in a place that is very well populated and keep them out of people's basically walking space, you'd create a wall maybe 8 feet high. And if you could look up, you'd see thousands of bees flying over your head. I work for a church in York County. We run about 600-700 people. I keep hives there. All last year during the COVID, where I keep the beehives, the bees would literally come out, climb over the treetops, and they'd fly to the food source. We were not aware that those bees were literally cruising because our parking lot was at higher elevation. They literally were cruising at the height of the roof of the car. So when we started our parking lot service, as you would sit there and watch, I literally was watching thousands of bees literally flying over the cars. And some folks said, hey, this is a problem. I said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. So I started going down every Sunday morning before services. I would gate the beehives so they couldn't leave. I would wait till our services were over, and I would ungate them, and then they'd go fly and they'd do their normal thing. But it just proved that point. That's when they found that altitude of cruise for them, and it was safe. It was out of everybody's way. And again, if you were walking, you wouldn't have seen the bees. But since you're sitting in your car and they were over the top of the car, everyone's seen lots of bees. And but those bees were there for 4 or 5 years, and no one ever knew they were there until we went to the parking lot services. So that, we never had a problem. No one's ever got stung. It's never been an issue.
What maintenance is required to maintain a hive? And what would happen if somebody loses interest or moves away from that property? What happens to the hive at that point?
Well, in this day and age, what's going to happen to the hive? It's going to die. So if you folks have not heard, our bees are in terrible shape, which is why we encourage as many people as we can to get into beekeeping. Commercial beekeepers are in it for the money, and they're moving their hives basically from money pit to money pit. They're taking them to California to the almonds taking them to Florida for the oranges, taking them to Maine for the strawberries and blueberries and all those things. That's not helping us. That's helping the produce and things like that. The bees that are going to help you at your house for your tree in your backyard are going to be your neighborhood beekeepers. Those are the people that are going to have bees that are going to pollinate your flowers, your crocuses, your tulips, your roses, all those types of things you want, your peaches, your pears, your apples, all those things. That's why you want that. We have a parasite that's called the Varroa Mite. And without intervention by the beekeeper, our bees are going to die, generally in one season. So someone who starts this spring with bees and they're not proactive at treating for the Varroa Mite, by the end of this season, those bees will be dead before they make winter. So only good beekeepers will actually have bees probably more than 1 year, and even good beekeepers will lose bees. So a hive left, unmanned, if you will, it's going to die. The worst that you're going to see is a honeybee swarm. If bees do what they do naturally in the wild, they're going to populate from 10,000 to 50. If they don't have enough room to expand in that beehive, that queen will leave and take up to 50% of those bees with her, and they will go home themselves somewhere else. It could be someone's soffit, their house, because in many cases the soffit is not filled with insulation, so they find that a nice, dry, warm area, and they go in. And then typically I get the call, hey, I got bees in my house, come get them out, please. It could be a tree, a hollow tree in your backyard that they find. And so they will go somewhere else. But we teach beekeepers how to husband their hives in such a way that before it gets to that point, the bees literally start to show us and tell us they're going to swarm. They begin to build extra queen cells and things along that nature. And so a beekeeper who has been trained absolutely knows that that hive will swarm and can take preventive measures to keep it from swarming. But it does happen in the wild all the time. And it's God's way of reproduction to a hive. And, a lot of people think, well, my bee, she lays 1,000 eggs and I get 1,000 bees, that's reproduction. And the truth of the matter is not, because the hive itself is one living organism, the same as your hand's not a body, it's part of the body. So that bee's no more than one part of the hive. And so for reproduction in a hive, it's really a new hive. And so when it does split, it created a new hive or a new organism all by itself. So, and that's good. That's the way it's supposed to happen. That's the way it happened 50 years ago when every farmer that you knew had a beehive on his farm. Your grandfathers and your great-grandfathers, everyone did. But now everybody's such monocropped, nobody has time to care for that. They're planting all their corn or all their wheat, or they're just, running their dairy cows and then buying their wheat off of this guy and their corn off of this guy. And God forbid, they need a pollinator. They call in the beekeeper to bring bees and put it on their farm. So again, they're back to us to really manage the bees. But I'm glad to answer any questions. I don't know what you might have as far as that, what you're looking for. I'm glad you at least allow it. Because like I say, before, when I dealt with the borough I live in, they didn't even allow it. But once they opened that crack to Dickinson College, the floodgates wide open, and I like I say, most of my sales of bees are right here in South Central PA between Harrisburg, Dauphin, Cumberland, Camp Hill, Mechanicsburg, some in York, stuff like that. But I have over 560 beekeepers in this area on my own personal register that buy off of me, and or have bought off of me within the last couple of years. And so there's a lot more here than people even know.
Well, we'll let them proceed with the PowerPoint, and if you're going to be sticking around, we may have more questions.
Absolutely, glad to answer anything I can.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, that was very interesting.
Very helpful and a good segue.
Yeah.
So our current ordinances, if you wouldn't mind switching to the next slide.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So our current ordinances, the section we're looking to change is 403D2 Part C. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hives, so that currently states, hives shall be located a minimum of 100 feet from any lot line, except the setback that should be reduced to 50 feet if a 6 feet minimum height fence or solid hedge is located along the adjoining lot line for a distance of at least 100 feet from the hives.
So you see that 6-foot fence is already mentioned in our ordinances. The difference is that our ordinances state that that must be in place if the setback is 50 feet. Some studies show, and many beekeepers will say, that that 6-foot fence is not as effective at 50 feet away as it would be at 5 feet away. Those bees are not going to be regulated to that height when it's 50 feet away, because they could come up to 4 feet, and that'll be their cruise level. If it's directly in front of the hive, that's when the difference is made, and that's when that cruise level, to your point, is achieved.
So you're saying that the ordinance should be changed to require the fence to be closer to the hive?
That is one change we're recommending, yes.
Okay.
And you're saying 5 feet?
Yes, but we'll have the full language on the next slide. But yes, 5 feet is what we're recommending.
Want to get to that?
Sure.
And it's 50 feet now.
50 feet now, yes. So what we're recommending, again, based on the Pennsylvania State Beekeepers Association model ordinances, is hives shall be located a minimum of 10 feet from any lot line. If a 10-foot cannot be obtained, a flyaway barrier should be installed. The flyaway barrier shall be at least 6 feet in height, shall be placed alongside of the hives, shall be located within 5 feet of the hives, and shall extend at least 2 feet on either side of the hives. I'll let everyone just read that and think about that for a minute, because that's a lot of numbers.
Yeah, you might want to change should be to must be. If you say should be, then people can or can't, and there's no enforcement power.
Oh, good idea.
You know.
We're good with must. I think must is a great word. That's great.
How about minimal?
So that's the ordinance we're recommending. Again, that is based on the Pennsylvania State Beekeepers Association. And again, that is more regulation than is seen in other municipalities in Dauphin County. But we do think that ordinance makes sense than maybe not having any. Any questions on hens before we get into, any questions on bees before we get into hens?
So we're going to talk chickens.
Yes. Okay. So again, we spoke with experts about this issue, and there are common misconceptions around hens, that they're loud and that they are smelly. Based on the research that we've done and the experts that we've talked to, that's not exactly true. Hens actually don't make noise all day. They do have a few squawks when they're laying an egg. They're basically giving birth, so they're going to be a few squawks. That happens. You seem like you have a question on that one.
Giving birth?
Yeah, if you're laying an egg.
Oh, okay.
Kind of the
Yeah,
same.
you said laying an egg or giving birth, and I'm like, okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Laying an egg is like giving birth.
Okay.
You know.
I was thinking like okay.
Otherwise, they're different. Yeah.
Guess I'm learning about the birds and bees too, Paul.
It's full circle from the first time we talked.
What can I say?
But hens don't make noise all day. They really only squawk, again, when laying an egg. And hens I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're good. According to a poultry extension, hens are going to make the loudest decibel level they reach is between 60 and 70, which is decibels, which is the same amount of what normal people speak at. The loud ones are roosters. Roosters can reach 90 decibels, which is the same as a dog's bark. So as you see, as we move forward through this, we're keeping our language to hens.
Another concern was that the smell of the bees, of the hens, waste smells. There's no getting around that, whether it's a dog, a chicken, whatever it is. What's interesting, though, is that chicken odor is really no more pungent than any other type of waste. In addition, they also produce significantly less waste than other common pets. If you look at a 40-pound dog, that generates more solid waste in one day than 10 chickens. I have nothing against dogs. We have a very loud, very rambunctious dog ourselves. But just putting it into context of what people have familiarity and experience with.
And chicken's waste has powerful nutrients in it that make for great compost that we can apply to our farms and stuff, whereas dog waste, you can't use it.
And like with any animal waste, a compost bin or trash cans, these items can smell if not cared for. But according to what we heard from the Extension Office and other experts, if the coops are properly maintained, and if there's a restriction on the number of hens and the distance from the lot line, those concerns really go down. And we also heard the same from the townships we spoke with in Dauphin County. They received very few nuisance calls about the smell or the noise of hens, excuse me.
And Penn State Extension Office recommends keeping hen houses or coops well ventilated and cleaned out once every 6 weeks to prevent from anything like that.
Yeah, any questions on those?
How does sub-freezing temperatures affect the hens?
Oh, great question. So hens actually create enough heat themselves that they don't need any kind of heat. If you think about a bird outside, birds don't freeze when it gets cold. Hens within their little coop produce enough heat to be fine.
They drink water?
They do. They drink water.
When the water freeze?
You do have to replace it. They drink a very little amount. But yes, you would have to replace it.
So when you said the laying of eggs, so they can lay an egg any time of day?
They typically lay in what we've read and heard from our family members who have chickens, is they typically lay in like the afternoon or around like lunchtime. But yes, I guess a chicken could lay an egg in the morning or at night.
Okay, I
So
was
an
just
average-
more concerned because you said about the noise when they lay an egg, and if it's during the night when people are sleeping and they have their windows up, it could be a noise issue.
Yeah.
So growing up with chickens in Elizabethtown, our chickens never laid at night. It was always during the day. And
Yeah, also important to note that hens need light to lay. So in the wintertime, the production of eggs actually decreases because there's not enough hours of light in the day. Now, farms will put lights on the chickens so they lay, but they do need light to lay. And again, those squawks aren't any louder than human conversation. It's not like a dog's bark or a rooster.
So are you looking to sell the eggs from the hens?
No, we're looking just to have these as pets. Which I know if you don't have chickens as pets, that can sound a little odd. But in most townships where chickens are permitted, they are considered pets. I mean, our hens would have names. We would eat the eggs that they produce, but then use their droppings on our garden. We would not sell the eggs.
If I can. I'm going to be just honest with you. So I am a nurse practitioner, so from a medical standpoint, I can address that. Also, I had a 70-acre farm, I had chickens and goats and all that other stuff. So as far as we're talking about concerns, I'm just going to be upfront with you. My issue that I have is that one hen is going to lay one egg per day, okay? So the average family, let's say you have three hens. They're not going to be able to eat that many eggs. Most people don't eat that many eggs. So there's going to be excess. And I will tell you, and you had a farm as well, what do chickens bring in? They bring in rodents sometimes. Because A, you have eggs that sit around and don't, they get rotten and somebody doesn't get them right away. And then B, the rodents quite frankly come in and they will peck at or eat the hens. So it absolutely happens. And so my issue, I guess, that I'm just going to be honest with is I think that the reason and the spirit behind the setbacks or the amount of land that you need, I'm just going to take this off, is because, we know that those issues are possible, right? So I lived over by Central Dauphin Middle, what's now the middle school, was the high school. I lived over there. That area is very close. I'm all for having chickens because I believe that our children need to learn how to do that stuff. I believe that they are a good they're a good resource. I think that I can see what you want to do with it, and I'm all for it. But at the same time, unfortunately, this board has to kind of look at everybody as a whole. And so if we could have an area that would be okay, to allow these things, which we kind of do by acreage, that makes it different. Maybe we could look at, changing that a little bit, but would somebody over by Central Dauphin be able to have chickens? In my mind, it's even if there's only one or two people, it's not really feasible, because you're going to end up having, potential for other issues that will absolutely adversely affect your neighbor, and that being possibly, the rodents that would come in. Secondly, from a medical standpoint, eggs have to be cleaned. They have to be cleaned a certain way. So if you're selling your eggs, if you decide to sell them, you have to clean them appropriately. What happens when somebody gets E. coli? Who's responsible for that? Because then, is the township responsible for allowing the chickens to be there? Do we have to regulate then and see, do we have to, are you allowed to sell them or not sell them? So please understand, as you said about the bees, I personally would love to have chickens. I'd love to have them. I wouldn't qualify to have them where I live now. But this board, unfortunately, has to make a tough decision that, we have to kind of weigh those things out. So you guys are going to be perfect at it. You're going to be great with the bees. You're going to be great with the chickens. Absolutely. But there is going to be that person, that population out there, that is not going to be great. Quick story. The reason I had chickens, because my son, who was 6 at the time, we went into Tractor Supply on 22, and around Easter time, they always have them. And he said, "Daddy, look at this." And I'm like, "Oh God, like one more thing." But I had horses at the time. So I thought, well, I've got 8 horses. What's it matter, to have 2 hens? Did the appropriate stuff, researched it, had the house, had farmers nearby that I could fortunately say, hey, like tap into them as a resource. And it was some work, but they will absolutely freeze in the wintertime. I didn't lose any of them, but I know that they will die, if not kept. And so that's the problem, is I got them because my son wanted to. It's going to happen. People are going to say, well, now I'm allowed to. And what happens when that person doesn't care for them? Because now we end up with frozen dead chickens, or they overheat in the summertime, your hen house. So I don't know if you've done some research, right? So I had Rhode Island Reds, right? So Rhode Island Reds, they require about 4 foot of space within their hen house. Well, that's a pretty big hen house, you know what I mean? So to be able to give them their room, their space, people aren't going to do that. They're not going to do the research on, a Rhode Island Red needs that much space. Hopefully they would, but we can't guarantee that they will. So the unfortunate thing is that some people absolutely ruin it for everyone, and that is a reality. So I'm just telling you, I'm all for the chickens, but, in my opinion, from where I stand, I don't know if I can make it happen for me, the chickens, in certain areas like over there by Central Dauphin, or some of our tighter places, that are a little bit closer, just for those reasons, because there are going to be people that are going to ruin it for everyone. So
Great
sorry,
points.
I just want to tell you, I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm
Yeah,
not
no,
gonna
I
fill you-
appreciate the transparency.
That's it. But yeah.
So for the first point for rodents, I would say that most of those rodents are probably already in our neighborhood due to bird seeders, due to people who leave their trash out, due to feral cats in our neighborhood. Like, we have a bald eagle who lives on the water tower down the street. We do. I have pictures. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. We have predatory birds. Yes, those are all, they could kill the chickens, but if you have a strong enough coop, I don't think that would be an issue.
And let me clarify. So these are all things also that can be addressed by the ordinance, right? Mm-hmm. So for sure, we can say, hey, look, like you have to have X, Y, and Z. In fact, we could say, like some of the other townships throughout Pennsylvania, actually that you guys referenced, they weren't as broad to say, hey, look, let's just have chickens and you're allowed to have them on your property while maintaining a fence. They actually, some of them out in Pittsburgh said that, no, you're allowed to have chickens, but you need to keep them maintained to a chicken coop that is, X, Y, and Z. This is how wide it has to be. This is how large it has to be per chicken. 3 chickens need this amount of space, right? We could do that. And that's totally possible. It does bring into question, though, now who is going to regulate that? Because again, there will be people that won't, that when we're aware of that, right? Like we know that they're not going to. There's going to be some people that will say, you know what, I'm going to get this. This seems like a good idea. And then just like a gerbil or something say, oh, you know what, like I'm not going to, and that's not fair to the animal either. And that will happen. And we've got to have somebody as a township to regulate that, and go out there and do that. And that's going to be our zoning officer, right?
Well, that's more staff time.
And that's more staff time, and that's more of an issue there. So I'm not trying to shoot you down, but I'm saying there are answers for everything, and there are ways to make things kind of work, and that's why we have laws and all these other things, and zoning and all, and that's why we have that. But it does take some effort. So we're not making any decisions tonight, but I'm just telling you, these are some of the questions that we have, that we've gotten, maybe questions that I personally have, and again, doesn't mean that we can't do it. We can make things, conform into, anything that we need, but there are consequences for this board where we go, well, if we do this stuff, then we've got to have, somebody's got to get a permit to put the chicken coop up there. Somebody's got to go out there and the zoning officer has to take a look at it and make sure that they're up to code, that they're doing the right thing. We got to have that person probably check on those and know, hey, do you still have chickens type of thing, which means that somebody like you guys that would have them might just put out, every year you might have to renew, a license or something like that. Things are possible. It's possible to do, but it does equal more money, and this board is about not increasing taxes for sure. So especially not during a pandemic. So these are all factors that are difficult to make a decision. I'm new here, but this is stressful. You know what I mean? It's a stressful decision because I want to help you and I want to have that happen. I might even have chickens myself if this passes, but I know that there's consequences for every action. And so you have 600 people that signed the thing, and that's wonderful, and I love that, and I love your enthusiasm, and you guys did your research, and this thing is amazing, that you put together here. But the chicken thing it's going to require some work, and that's why I think it's taken so long for us to get to this point to ask some questions, because it is just it's a lot. We know, and we know when stuff is coming down the pipe, and we do our research too. So, I mean, I was going to say 10,000 to 60,000 bees, per thing. So, I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into it. So have time, patience with us and whatever. There's a lot of stuff that goes with it. And give us some, we already looked at some of the things, or I did anyway, at least what other places were doing, in their ordinances to try and to accommodate for this stuff. So, but, well, I don't know if we.
Okay, can we maybe get back to finishing the PowerPoint
Sorry about that. I won't
No,
ask
that's
any more
okay.
questions.
No, that's the purpose. The purpose of the workshop is that we do exactly what you did.
Mr. Chairman, just to touch on what Paul just said, I think you'd be surprised, at least I was, how many residents are already ignoring the ordinance as it's written now. And so, without naming names and getting specific, how many complaints are we getting now with a number of people that are not abiding by the ordinance?
We are getting complaints, and I know that from talking to Nick. So, and
Do we know how many we get? Like, is it? I don't recall it being a. Amanda isn't here, so I don't recall Amanda.
Well, there were issues in Linglestown, I know when I first came on the board, with loads and loads of chickens because the neighbors were very upset because of the smell and the quackling and the chickens running loose, so we have.
Feral chickens?
We have gotten.
I mean, Mrs. Zerby has mentioned anecdotally some issues. If it's the board's pleasure, I can pull together some hardcore data,
Yes.
actual information for you to take a look at.
It would be interesting to know, how many complaints do we get now on average?
Sure.
Well, and I think too, I know there was an issue, I got a call here just a couple weeks ago from someone on Snell Drive, and her neighbor has them, and she's very upset, because of the smell and the coops, and she has to look at it. And I told her that she needed to call in and talk, and she said, I can't because they'll tell them who. And I said, no, when you do, it's anonymous. But I think a lot of people are afraid to call in for fear that the neighbors are going to find out who did it. Then it's a lot of retaliation, a lot of retaliation. But we were just told prior in executive board that our codes officer handled 540 some complaints last year in our township, not with, not just chickens, but complaints. So my concern is if we do go ahead and do this and we start getting all these complaints, we're going to have to hire another codes person, to take care of it. And I live in a TND where a traditional neighborhood development where we are 5 feet apart. We're individual homes where I live, but we're 5 feet apart because it's a village effect. And I would not like to have a chicken coop beside me, because, and the same thing with the bees. I'm scared to death of bees. And, so to have the chickens there and listening to the cackling and the smell and looking at a chicken coop, I just think we have areas that if you do this as a township, we have too many areas where the homes are too close together, So, I mean, the acre is what we have now, but to go smaller, I just don't know if that's the solution to it.
Thank you for your thoughts. So I think I would be interested to see if the acreage issue, because if we go to the next slide, the current ordinance reads, I'm sorry, 2 slides to go.
Slides?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
The current ordinance reads, pigeons, chickens, roosters, ducks, geese, and our similar fowl shall not be kept in a lot of less than 1 acre. There is no current setback. Now, I assume the setback would be the same as any other setback for a shed or for anything else of that matter, which I believe is 10 feet, I think. So what we're recommending actually would include a setback to keep those coops away from the fence, to help with any concerns around smell and noise. And I think we are still recommending an acreage limit, but 1/4 of an acre instead of 1 acre. So maybe those smaller units, like the ones you mentioned, still wouldn't apply. If we go to the next slide, please.
I think going from an acre to 1/4, that is a huge difference. That's a huge difference. So I'm just giving you my opinion.
Yeah. And where does the problem come into play if it's a difference? Just
Because the lot's smaller. I don't care if you set it back 20 feet, they're still on less than an acre of land, and they're still there. You're still hearing them, you're still smelling them, and your neighbor still has to look at the coops. And there your neighbor is trying to take care of their yard, making it look nice, and they're looking at coops, sitting in their neighbor's yard.
Great concerns. I think there is a misconception around what coops look like. You can actually get very attractive, cute little coops on Wayfair. And again, I would just point to the fact that our neighboring townships, like Susquehanna Township and others, have looser restrictions with 30-foot setbacks without acreage limitations, and they don't see the calls around nuisances. They see more calls around dogs and cats, but not chickens, because they actually don't make that much noise and they actually aren't that smelly. Yes, if you have 8 1/4 of an acre or 10 1/4 of an acre, yes. Based on what the Penn State Extension Office recommends, we are recommending no more than 6 hens on 1/4 of an acre. Maybe the correct number is 4, or maybe it's 2. But I think if other areas with smaller yards or equal yards in terms of size can figure this out in a way that makes sense and they're able to regulate it and they're not getting the nuisance calls, I do think that we could figure it out as well.
But there again, you go and you say 4, and then that's what we do with the ordinance, and then people end up putting 6 or 8, then guess what? Our codes officer gets a call. There we go, we have to go back out again, and there we keep adding up the calls and the calls, So it is a township thing as far as spending money, and it's taxpayers' money, So that is a big concern with the board.
Totally respect that. Can you help me understand, just from a regulation perspective, why we trust residents to have 5 dogs of any size, on any lot size, in any part of the neighborhood? Why we don't trust them to have a smaller animal?
I wish Amanda would be here, but isn't there a number of dogs that someone is allowed to have in their house?
We do have limitations on that. I'm not sure
Right.
the number.
It's 5.
It is 5.
Is it 5?
Thank you.
Yes.
Aren't they generally kept inside the house, though?
There's no language that says they have to be.
I know, but in practice, dogs are inside animals, and so same thing with cats, except for the feral ones, which that's a whole other story we're not going to get into again.
I would say the majority, but I do know of neighbors in our township who keep their dogs outside. And also, I would not personally have a chicken inside, but I know there are people who have their chickens inside.
You should not have birds in the house, I can tell you that. No birds in the house, no.
Yeah. We just have one more slide. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes,
One
yes.
thing That's part of our proposed ordinance is that they would not run around at all.
Yeah, we
That's
don't-
what Susquehanna, we talked to them, they said they get a lot of people that call just because they're running around, not so much being in the yards, but because they're free running. Pennsylvania, the Penn State Extension Office also recommended not letting them run around.
But
And that's
there
just best
again,
for the
we'd have to have our
animals.
codes officer being on, we'd almost have to hire a codes officer just for that. You know, if everybody would end up having chickens, you know, in their backyard, people don't obey. You know, they do, you can say this is the ordinance, but people do not obey.
Just like with dogs, right? That people would let their dogs run loose.
So you're saying they stay in the coops?
Yes. Yep. And that's best for the animal. Again, with the eagle and the hawks and the foxes and the dogs and whomever, that's just best for the animal. I just had another thought come to mind. I forget what it was though.
Should we phone a friend?
Well, can we finish
Well,
our
let's-
last
Yeah,
slide?
I got one more thing.
Yeah, let's finish the slide presentation, and then, are there others who wish to speak to this? Just want a couple, okay. So we'll finish the slide presentation and then move on so we can let other folks have some say. So is there anything else on the slide presentation? Which, by the way, is one of the most thoroughly researched presentations I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I'm sure it took a lot of work on your behalf to put this together, so thank you for that.
Yeah,
You
great
need
job.
if you need a study on the municipal websites, we can provide that as well, because we've looked at a lot of them. And then just to go through these quickly, so the benefits, we know there were supply chain disruptions that really caused a legitimate problem in 2020. We could not get eggs unless we went to our father-in-law, who has chickens.
Wait a minute, you're telling me last year that during COVID, you could not, visited 3 grocery stores and not had one issue getting an egg.
It was empty. I could not get eggs. Maybe we went at different times. Also, for economic opportunities, I think it's really important. A lot of people don't realize that the honey you buy in a store is made abroad in China and heavily diluted. So all of those cute little honey in the cute little bee bear jars, that's all from China. It's all diluted. By allowing people to have honeybees, they could sell the honey as a way to diversify their income locally and increase individual stability of residents. And also we spoke to 3 different small businesses, Staffers, the Tractor Supply, and the feed store on Jonestown Road, who would also benefit from seeing both of these ordinances changed, or one. We realize these are separate ordinances and they may not be amended together. And lastly, it's just a hobby.
Yeah, just a hobby. Just like vegetable gardening, bike riding, and community service, raising of backyard hens and honeybees is a fun hobby, one that creates connections between neighbors.
I have a question, do the chickens go to the vet?
They do. There are local vets who serve, who see chickens.
Okay, well, my main concern is what if one would get out and someone got bit by one? Would they have rabies? Could they have rabies?
I've never heard of, yeah.
No, they don't transmit.
They don't transmit. Okay, I didn't know, that's why I asked.
No.
It's a good
Okay,
question.
but I'm just saying, if you get bit by one, if you got an infection,
I don't recall hearing a lot of people getting bit by chickens, though.
But I guess you
You
never
never
know.
know.
It could happen if someone
Yes, it could
handles
happen, but
incorrectly.
They don't bite you, they peck you.
That's
Oh, but
right.
you know
That's
what I
right.
meant, they're
Yeah.
still gonna break your skin.
Okay, thank you all for listening
Paul.
to all of that. Thank you.
Thanks both of you for your effort on this. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so a couple of other hands here, sir. If you would come up to the podium, give us your name and address.
Yeah, I want to give you, before I take off my mask, some Lower Paxton honey.
Oh,
I'm a hobbyist. I do not sell my honey. I supply my family
Thank you.
and friends. This was produced from bees here in the township.
Thank you. Would this be considered a bribe?
Mr. Solicitor.
Is there a value on this?
I think it falls under the de minimis category here. But very nice of you, sir. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Matter of fact, since it comes from Lower Paxton, that's all we need to know. That's
My name is Link Martin. I live at 5218 Crestwood Drive, just a few blocks from here. We've lived there for 34 years. My two children went to Central Dauphin, actually with Paul. And my Swiss exchange student played hockey with you, Sylvain.
Sylvain, yeah, I'm still friends with him.
Yeah, he's happy with a couple of kids now. I'm a hobbyist. I've been raising bees for 3 years.
And they're at Crestwood?
No, they're not.
Okay,
I can't have them on Crestwood Drive.
okay.
My lot's too small.
Thank you for obeying.
It's not a good ordinance, because as you've been hearing, bees are not the aggressive, attacking type of animals that they're portrayed to be. I got into beekeeping as a hobby, just out of strict interest, for a couple of reasons. One, concern for the environment. What kind of world are my grandchildren going to live in? And if we each don't take some responsibility, even small ways, things are going to be much more difficult for them. Second, as I move towards retirement, which my children are saying is coming very quickly, I'm looking at things I like to do. I like to do things outdoors. I've always gardened. And beekeeping's always been an interest of mine. I took classes through Penn State. I took a course through the Lancaster Beekeepers Association before I got into it. And that's why I think the ordinance that's being proposed, the model ordinance, is very clear of helping people prepare to go into the hobby. It's not extremely cheap. You have to buy equipment or make your own. As was mentioned, bees take maintenance. It's not something you just put in a hive and forget. You can, but they're going to die. And my interest is not letting my hobbies die. I have no interest in selling honey. I provide it to my family and friends and coworkers because it's interesting to do. The problem with the current ordinance is that a lot of the smaller, older communities in Lower Paxton, working class communities, we can't keep bees. It's prohibited. You have to own enough property currently under the zoning to make it viable, which is not obtainable for a lot of us. We can't afford to go buy enough acreage to qualify, and I don't want to move. So it's important that we look at what is a reasonable alternative to the current prohibition. The Beekeepers Association has a model ordinance that addresses all the concerns you voiced tonight. Setbacks, barriers to make bees fly up and away from homes, training that folks should be required. All of my hives, I have 3 hives. They're all registered with the state, something that's required by the state. And again, if we enact an ordinance based on good practice, developed by the statewide organization, then Lower Paxton can be a model for other communities. Currently, as was mentioned, most of the communities in our county have no ordinances at all. If you go on Wood Street, drive over towards Union Deposit from Locust Lane, you'll see on the left-hand side, completely legal, a gentleman with about several beehives in his front yard. This ordinance what's being proposed would not allow that in Lower Paxton. So rather than having such a restrictive ordinance that we currently have that prohibits hobbyists such as myself from enjoying my hobby in my yard, I have to travel. Let's develop a reasonable alternative that loosens the setback, the requirements for acreage, but at the same time increases the responsibilities by the beekeeper to be trained, to be registered, to follow the rules. There will be calls and complaints, and I don't know how many you currently get, but that's true about dogs and everything else. If the ordinance is clear up front and you have people trained, you're less likely to have problems after that. My 3 grandsons, when they visit, they're in the yard. I take them out to the beehive where they are on the acreage. They walk up to them. I put veils on them, but they're not afraid of them. I don't want them to get stung, and I would not recommend them running up and hitting the hive, which the 5-year-old wanted to do. So you take reasonable precautions. On the other hand, they've been stung by wasps, and, which is not something I can control. So there are risks, but we minimize the risk by good ordinances. And if someone is violating an ordinance of any type in the township, a complaint, it's investigated, and there can be consequences. To have the current ordinance, which prohibits people like me from keeping bees in my yard, makes it much more difficult for us to engage in healthy outdoor hobbies. We don't want to move, have no intention of moving, but there's a reality of how much am I willing to continue to drive to some other location in the township to visit my bees and take care of them. I don't want to neglect them, but if I get older and unable to make those trips as frequently, then I'm going to have to get out of the hobby, because I'm not going to let the bees die. So I think what is being suggested is a very reasonable approach. A thoughtful approach, a researched approach, would make the township update its zoning to what's reasonable, at the same time, not just open the floodgates. So I'm strongly suggesting that you look at what's being proposed as a very reasonable, updated approach. If you look at who keeps bees, an increasing number of people interested in beekeeping are millennials. If we think about the future of the township, some of us are going to age out. Who's going to move into this township? Who's interested in living in a little bit different lifestyle than perhaps what has been? And I think we have to continue to update regulations to recognize not only the current population, but the future population of the township. What kinds of hobbies, what kinds of things? And the younger folks in our community are much more interested in environment and protecting what's going to happen next. And I think we should reinforce and recognize and celebrate that interest in the environment. My bees produce, I think, excellent honey. They get it from ranging 3 to 5 miles in every direction. There's no way to tell what my bee is versus a wild bee or someone else's. But it's enjoyable, it's productive, it helps everyone, and the risk and the harms are minimal. But again, with the current zoning, it makes it impossible for those of us who live in the older neighborhoods to engage in this very healthy hobby. So, as I said, I've only done it for 3 years. I followed what I thought was a reasonable approach, take some classes, do the Penn State class, do the local bee, I belong to the Capital Area Beekeepers Association. I read, because again, if I'm doing something, I want to do it well. It's not something I think most people get into on a whim, because it's not a simple hobby. There's little complexities to it. So I appreciate you thinking about this. I know tonight's not a decision-making night, but I think what's been presented is an extremely reasonable approach to looking at the zoning. And I know there's those of us in the township are more than willing to be involved over the next few months or whatever period it takes to think it through, rewrite it, come up to something that will allow more of us to be legal in providing. And we know there are probably folks out there doing it against the rules, but we don't want to have to do that. And like I say, it's difficult to find a spot within the township if you don't own the acreage to put your beehives in. So I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
If there are
Thank you.
questions of me, I'll be glad to answer.
No, you've explained it very well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you, sir. I think I saw another hand. Sir, would you like to, if you give us your name and your address?
Hello, I'm Kevin Anderson. I live at 4609 Coventry Road. I'm a resident of Lower Paxton Township. And I really don't have a lot to add besides what was already, spoken tonight. I'd just like to I came to show my support of the amending the current ordinance allow the keeping of bees and hens. And I think that, that's something that we should allow. I think a lot of the areas, neighborhoods in the township, where a lot of us live, at one time were fields or farms or forests, and now they've been developed and they'll never go back to farms again or fields again. And I think, we need to do whatever we can to accommodate, honeybees and support their ability to pollinate, flowers and trees and food sources. And I think that for folks that want to keep a few hens in their backyard to have some fresh eggs, and even if they get a few more eggs than what they can consume, I think it's always fun to be able to give, something to your family members to, share the fruits of your labors. So, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for our able-bodied solicitor. With all the homeowner associations that we have throughout the township, can they override or amend?
The answer to that is yes. I mean, they can have their own set of rules for what's permitted within the development. So, yeah, if they have rules in their declaration that there can be no kind of animals like which would normally considered agricultural or farm animals like chickens or bees. They can have those regulations, and there's nothing the township can do about a homeowners association regulating that.
But they would only be able to do more restrictive, not less restrictive, correct?
Well, they can have whatever restrictions they want, but I guess what I'm saying is that the ordinance is still enforceable. Like, let's say they were less restrictive than the township was, and the township ordinance would still apply, regardless of what it said in the declaration.
Anybody who hasn't spoken yet who would like to speak? And sir, if you want to come back up and maybe give some closing remarks? About the chickens. So we're going to go from bees to birds. We've had a lot of fun with how we've termed this meeting tonight.
By the way, I do appreciate the fact that you're hearing us out.
Oh, sure.
And this is good. And again, this is not even, where I live. But Scott mentioned he had chickens, but he also mentioned he had a farm. And so to Scott's argument, you're comparing, or Paul, you're comparing apples to oranges, because I'm sure your chickens were free range, where most of these folks who are asking for chickens, it's already been stated, are to be cooped. They're not to be free range chickens. So if I had 1 acre versus I had 100 acres, or versus I had 1/10 of an acre, if my fenced-in coop is a 10-foot by 10-foot coop, it really doesn't matter how much acreage I have. The coop size should be adequate for the safety and the welfare for the chicken, more so than the size of my lot. And so logic kicks in. You also made the statement about, multiple times I've heard the statement here tonight about, if we get a lot of complaints, it's going to cost us a lot of money. I'm glad we're not arguing on a firearms ordinance, because to be quite honest, I'm a heavy gun advocate. I believe every legal, rightful person in the United States who desires the right to own a firearm should be able to do so. Mm-hmm. And to be prohibited because someone wants to do something illegal is a shame. You're punishing the legal guy because something illegally has happened. But you've stated that same argument here by saying, we're not sure we want to do this because there will be people who won't abide by it. Well, then you punish those people. You don't punish the thousands of other taxpayers in your jurisdiction because they want to do it right. And then you therefore find the people who don't want to do it right, and therefore that is where the money comes from to pay that guy. I understand you get complaints from people who call in because of different things. I also know this. I've heard it said, the Bible makes it perfectly clear, the squeaky hinge gets the oil. One person can make an awful lot of complaints, and you know that to be true.
Very,
And,
very true.
and if we policed every ordinance, you would not have enough people anywhere on to do that. I can't even begin to imagine how many dogs you have that live in your jurisdiction. But I bet your guy never goes to a door and knocks on it and says, "Can I see the legal paperwork to make sure your dog is licensed?" It doesn't happen until someone gets bit, or they're going to go to the vet to get their shots. Then they call and get the license. It's the truth, and you know it's the truth. And to take the easy road by saying, you know what, this is going to take a lot of work to put together an ordinance to make this feasible for people. To be honest, it is shameful to say this, but that's what you get paid for. That's why people have elected you to be here, to represent them. And again, I'm not trying to bash anybody, but if I voted somebody in and I pay taxes in a particular township or residence, and I want something and I get told, well, you can't do that simply because we're going to get a backlash or a hypothetical backlash of a lot of people who might want to break that ordinance, then shame on you. Do your homework. Put together as much as these people have. They didn't get paid for this. Mm-hmm. They put a lot of work in to just ask for something they want. And if you did the same due diligence, you could put together a very good ordinance that would allow these folks to have what they want and allow you to punish those who don't.
I'm pretty sure that that's actually what I said. Was it not? I'll go back and watch the video, but I'm pretty sure that what I said was that I was just merely saying that the rest of that you have to understand, this board has a lot of decisions to make. Didn't say no. Didn't say no, you can't do it. Said, actually verbatim, I'm pretty sure that what I said was that we can have restrictions that will confine it, that will make it work, but at the same time, wasn't copping out and saying that oh, we're going to have to spend more money. Well, I don't appreciate that.
Well, I
That's what you said.
I apologize.
And don't take the words out of my mouth, but listen, what I said was that it's going to take somebody else. And I'm putting out there the reality. The reality is, yeah, we can go out there. It doesn't matter if we're looking for these guys and I have to have a zoning officer go out there and pay them to do that. I got to hire somebody else to get out there and look for the people that are breaking the law. Correct?
But that's
so it's going to require one other
every day
person.
with a guy who has a dog that doesn't have a valid license on his neck.
True. And
you don't police that.
And I certainly understand that. And I believe I nodded my head. I said, oh, yeah, I agree. But listen, here's the other deal. Like, you're talking to a lot of people up here that also don't believe that government should be taking away people's rights. So
and I
we
thank God
want
for
to,
that.
yeah.
Yes.
So amen. We want to not do that, right? But at the same time, we also have to look out for the best interest of this township, of the people of the township. And it's not always necessarily what people want to do. And I understand what you're saying about go for the people that are doing the wrong and not the people that are doing the right. Don't punish the people that are doing the right. I'm with you on that, brother. That's great. But at the same time, hold on, I'm almost done. At the same time, it still is going to cost us money to have somebody to regulate the person that is doing the wrong. And that's fine. Maybe that's what the board will decide to do. In fact, I said, we are not making a decision tonight, and that's not what we're doing. So I didn't say any of that stuff that you said, but what I did say was, I appreciate everything that you guys did. I'm with you on a lot of it, but we also do have to sit up here and make a decision that's going to be the best for everybody. And once again, what else did I say? You don't live in our township, but we don't want to increase taxes.
Right.
Not during COVID.
Sure.
So we're not going to hire somebody during COVID while everybody else is struggling, and we're going to have to increase taxes. Not going to happen, bro.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
But I don't think...
Let me interject here something else. I want to correct something you said. Nobody here made any comment about the cost of changing the ordinance. The reason we're having this meeting tonight is because we've had residents of our township and taxpayers who have brought to our attention an issue. And this couple back here have been here a number of times, and they have, as I mentioned earlier, put a lot of work into research, which is enormously helpful and frankly saves our staff a lot of time
Yeah.
that we have it. And the reason we're having this meeting tonight is because we are willing to listen and consider changes. Now, what changes may or may not occur, we aren't there yet. And I do understand that the wheels of government sometimes move a lot, always move a lot more slowly than what we would like. But we are going to go through the process here, and nobody's concerned about the cost of going through the process. You're right, that's why we're here.
But I was referring to the statement was made multiple times that if we do this, we may have to hire another enforcement
Well,
officer.
that is a
but-
very real possibility.
It is a possibility, but it's more of a hybrid, what do you call it?
Hypothetical?
Hypothetical. Because unless you have a precedence to prove that point, and I think you'll find that you contact all these other zoning places and ask them, out of the percentage of people that they know who live in their area, what is the percentage of calls you get on bees
Man, that's-
or on chickens? I guarantee it'll be less than 1%.
Well, that's one of the things we will do under due diligence, and and everything we do is a balance between you being able to have bees or chickens on your property. Personally, I sit in a place where if you own a parcel of property and you've bought it and you worked for the money and you paid for the property, I want to give you the maximum amount of freedom because it's your property, not ours. We also have to be careful, though, that the person who also did that next to you, what's the impact on that person? So the reason for the ordinance is how do we give you the maximum ability to keep chickens or bees while at the same time not compromising the quality of life of your next door neighbor.
Sure.
So that's the balance, and it's going to take a little bit of time. We are going to continue looking into this, so you can be assured of that.
I would just ask you to consider the fact, I'm sure that this meeting was advertised,
Yes.
right?
Oh, yes.
And the subject matter was also advertised?
Yes.
And I don't see one person in attendance tonight who came here to speak out against any of this stuff, but multiple people come to say we are in favor of this. That in itself should speak volumes.
It does?
And so, again, I don't want you to feel like I'm attacking you at all.
No, not at all.
But I have seen a lot of this. We want to be politically correct. We don't want to infringe on anyone's rights, so infringe on your right. And at some point in time, it really needs to be that, we're not going to cater to the minority. Let's cater to the majority. And I think the majority of the folks that live in this township and probably anywhere else in the United States, for the most part, are all for these types of things. And it's time we move in that direction. So, thank you.
Not big on political correctness. No, thank you, sir. Anybody else? I want to make sure everybody's had an opportunity. And in terms of the process, this is, as was advertised, a workshop meeting where we wanted to take public input, and we've had that opportunity. So now what I will do is I will ask each of the members of the board to funnel your thoughts on what proposed changes you would be interested in entertaining to the township manager. We can't debate this amongst ourselves in a non-public meeting. So we'll give our input to the manager and see what areas we potentially might have some interest in amending. And then we will bring that back to another workshop so we can interact some more before we try to get things down on paper. So I would ask everybody to please get your thoughts to Brad within the next couple of weeks so that we can continue considering this at next month's workshop meeting. Anybody have any thoughts on that process?
No, just in the spirit of true transparency. A lot of discussion on expenditures and hiring and what it's going to cost us. The timing might have been a little off because we were briefed tonight on how overtasked our codes department is right now. So that might have been something that kind of swayed some of the discussion tonight. I just wanted to let you know that's how probably that came about.
Yeah, the codes department was in at our executive session just bringing us up to date on all the statistics for the year so far. And the good news is that building permits and applications for construction and everything are through the roof in the aftermath of, shouldn't say aftermath because we're not out of it yet, but there was a lot of pent-up demand through the early and middle part of last year that is now broken loose, and people are wanting to build and buy and all sorts of things, and it's putting a little bit of strain on. But I think we'll also get by that peak here at some point as well. So, but that's, again, putting the cart before the horse. So again, please forward any parts of this that pique your interest in terms of potential amendments to the zoning code, and then we'll collate all those and talk about it more next month and see where we go to from there. But thank you to everybody for being here. We appreciate your input. I do not see any other items on the agenda. Anybody have any announcements? Okay, hearing none, our next board meeting will be a business meeting. That will be 1 week from tonight, Tuesday, March 16th at 7 p.m. in this room. If I don't hear any other items of business, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.